A movie takes place in war-torn Afghanistan, where a 27-year-old woman named Farah is taking care of her elderly husband Amid in a shabby room. Sadly, Amid is reduced to a vegetative state because of a bullet in the neck. The doctor claimed he'd be well in 1 or 2 weeks, but it's been 16 days, and he's still immobile. Furthermore, because of the continual gunfire and explosions in the area, Farah is having a difficult time protecting herself, her 2 daughters, and her husband. Despite that, she's optimistic that her husband will awaken soon, so she washes, feeds, and prays for him every day. One day, Pharaoh requests that her husband hold his breath, and when he does, she realizes that her Mid can hear her voice just then. Her daughters bother her claiming they're hungry, and at the same time, she realizes that drinking water is also running low. Later, Farah goes to the pharmacy and requests medication to keep her husband alive. However, it's since she has no money, the pharmacist refuses to give her anything. Disappointed, Farah returns home and gives her maid a mixture of salt and sugar water to keep them alive, desperate for help. The poor woman puts on her hijab and goes to her aunt's house. However, an elderly landlord opens the door and informs her that her aunt has moved out fairer than asks for the new address of rent, but the elderly lady closes the door without saying anything. Now, Pharaoh returns home upset by this revelation and informs her husband about it. Furthermore, she tells me that his mother and brothers have abandoned him due to the dread of bombings. This makes her upset as well, because he remembers her Mid being shot after getting into a confrontation with someone for insulting his mother that evening. Fair burns a kerosene lamp since there's no electricity in the house. The daughters ask her why their father is so upset with them. However, Fair informs the girls that Dad is not furious and that he's simply sick, but he'll be fine soon. The following morning, a healer arrives to see the injured man, but since Fair doesn't have any money, she refuses to let him into the house, claiming she's dirty and on her period, realizing that he can't see the injured man. The healer says he'll pray for him and promises to return in few days. Sometime later, Fairy hears an announcement throughout the city calling for people to gather at the mosque to get guns and protect their city. Realizing that an attack is imminent, she quickly gathers her girls and heads to the bomb shelter, where other neighbors join her. Farah doesn't carry her husband there, so she just prays and hopes he survives. Locals in the bunker listen to the radio and hear the news ordering them not to leave till the missile attack is ended. Meanwhile, some fighters enter the house and discover Hamid lying down motionless. They then rob the poor man, taking his watch and wedding ring before searching other rooms. There's no one else in the house, and when they notice the Quran lying next to him, the fighters realize he shares the same faith and quietly leave the house after the bombing fare comes from the cellar and immediately checks on her husband. He's alive. But she finds that some of the items in the house are stolen, and as she walks outside, Fair is horrified to see 5 of her neighbors' dead bodies hanging in the middle of the yard. Realizing she can't continue on like this, Ferret takes her girls and returns to her aunt's address. The landlord refuses to speak to her once again, but the woman swears she will not go until she has the address, having no other choice. The landlord eventually gives Fair the new address of her aunt, who has moved into a motel soon enough. Fair finds her aunt has seen up who lives in a safe section of town and operates a prostitution business. During their talk, a senior reveals that she used to be married, but when she was unable to have children, her husband sent her to care for his parents. But after discovering she was infertile, her father-in-law kept taking advantage of her until she was forced to kill them in cold blood. After some conversation, Pharaoh returns to care for her injured husband after leaving her children and has seen his care, despite the difficulties. Faris committed to her Islamic principles and does not wish to abandon her husband at home. Fair begins to feel quite lonely, and she continues to converse with her vegetative husband alone. She says she understands why their relatives departed, since they were aware of the impending war, and the house was directly in the line of fire. She then scolds her husband for failing to inform her and the children about their imminent danger. Farah claims that if he died, one of his brothers would have married her, and she and her children would have been safe. She also discusses how she was never happy during their 10-year marriage. Vera says that she had to marry at the age of 17. But because her mid was gone on the battlefield, she had to get married to paper photograph and dagger of them instead of a real person. Fair describes how her father was a gambling addict who always disregarded his daughter. It was okay if he won the game, but if he lost, he beat her and kicked Farah and her mother. However, one day after losing all of his money and property, her father had nothing left to lose. He then sold Farah's sister to a middle-aged man in his 40s, therefore Farah considered herself fortunate that even though she's married to an old man like Hamid, he's still a war hero. However, Hamid was at war. During their marriage fair, his mother-in-law was in charge of her life. She used to sleep with Farah every day to protect her virginity, which made her uncomfortable. Meanwhile, her brother-in-law would often sneak outside her door to watch her bathe. She was terrified of them, but Farah could only pretend she didn't know anything because her mother-in-law would accuse her of being bad if she ever complained. The following day, Pharaoh returns to Hasina and informs her that she's unable to stop confessing dreadful truths to a paralyzed husband. Hearing this, Hasina tells her about a patient stone to which one can speak in order to reveal all their secrets and hardships. When all is said, the stone explodes as if the person's trauma has been passed into it, and that person is relieved of their melancholy state. And since Farah has been telling every little detail of her mind to Hamid, Hasina understands that her husband is her patient stone. Later, when Pharaoh arrives home, she kisses her husband for the first time in 10 years. She then begins to talk to him about the moment he returned from war. He looked very handsome on the outside, but his cold eyes frightened her on their first night amid was soon fast asleep, and the poor woman had to pretend to be happy, despite her pain. Farah made it through this one, but her further days were even tougher after she and their husband shared a room every day. Her mother-in-law kept an eye on her belly since she was expecting her daughter-in-law to give birth. The following day, Farah hears unusual noises, but it turns out that her neighbors are burying their loved ones. Farah understands that the city is full of warriors who can kill her disabled husband. Therefore, she hides her maid in a niche with drapes and a pillow. Soon after, a commander enters the house and points a gun at her, asking her to stay quiet, just that another young soldier comes inside. And upon seeing Farah, he's instantly smitten by her. Later, when the old commander inquires about her family, Pharaoh reveals that she's a widow with 2 daughters. During their talk, she reveals that she was a prostitute who sells her body to support her 2 daughters. Hearing this, the commander becomes enraged and begins lecturing her and calling her names. He then spits in her face before walking away. Later, Farah visits Hasina and tells her what happened earlier that day. Achina claims that she did the right thing because those people would have taken advantage of her if they'd not known she was a prostitute, according to their beliefs. Sleeping with a prostitute woman is exceedingly shameful and repulsive, but sleeping with a noble woman is somehow a matter of great dignity. Achina then invites her to spend the night, but Fair declined, since she needs to care for her husband. The next day, Faris startled awake by loud noise and notices that it's the young soldier from yesterday. The soldier then asks her how much she charges, but Farah insists that she's not a prostitute. He then dumps money on the floor and forces himself onto her. However, he only lasts a few seconds, and she realizes that the boy has never been with a woman before. After the guy leaves, Ferris sobs, all alone, feeling horrible, and then goes to the bathroom to wash her shame away. Later, Farah vents her frustration and talks about the soldier to her husband. She then takes her earnings and goes to buy water and medicines. The next day, the young soldier reappears and offers Pharaoh some more money in exchange for sleeping with him. This time, she agrees and takes him to a room willingly. Fair later confesses this to her husband, knowing that if he were healthy right now, he would have killed her. She then claims that Hamid was never good in bed and didn't care about her desires, but the soldier is learning and getting better. The following day, Farah notices that someone has repaired the fence of her house. Once again, the young soldier arrives, but Farah says she can't do it today. However, he persists in coming and claims to only want to talk the two, then go inside. And when Pharaoh removes his clothes, she noticed a cigarette burns and scars on his body. The soldier informs Fer that the old commander she saw earlier tortures them every day. He reveals that he's an orphan and that the commander found him on the street and made him a soldier. Seeing this, Thera calms him down and hugs him gently. The next morning, Fer discovers a package in front of her home with fruits and a gold necklace given to her by her soldier in love. She then puts on some nice clothes and makeup while she waits for the guy Farah tells her maid that only with that young soldier she feels like a true woman and feels happy. She then reveals the fact that when she was pregnant, she tried to get rid of the baby and thought of strangling the child with her feet. It turns out that her husband is not the father of her daughter's Fer, went to the doctor at the time because she couldn't have children for 6 months. Her health was fine, and it was her husband who was infertile, but her mother-in-law was adamant that she have a child, and even suggested that her mid marry someone else, so Hasina devised a plan and informed her mother-in-law that they'd found a healer. Hasina actually found a pimp, and they were blindfolded and trapped in a dark room to get intimate. Fer eventually became pregnant, but unfortunately it was a daughter, so she repeated the process with a different man. But the second child was also a daughter. Fairer than admits that she has no idea who their daughter's father is, as she reveals this major secret, how Amid suddenly awakens from his coma, and before she can react, Amid grabs her by the neck with great force while she struggles to breathe. However, Fer gathers the guts to reach for a knife and stabs him in the back as her husband dies, her eyes well up with tears. Just then, the young soldier arrives at the house and witnesses this scene right in front of his eyes.
Subscribe for more videos like this, enable notifications, and leave a like to support the channel.